What I think we lost along the way was the idea that in order to be targeted, you have to be one-to-one and addressable. Because of things like technology gaps, cookie deprecation, all of that, we actually started optimizing ourselves out of growth. We still see happen for some brands, especially that are only performance driven or only looking at the last touch attribution or drive to immediate ROI benchmarks, but we started to optimize ourselves into a corner.
This is the Snarketing Podcast. For marketers by marketers. Talking to marketers with just a touch of snark. Now, here are your hosts, Valerie Vespa and Matt Wurst.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Snarketing Podcast. If we had an advertiser, this is where we would do a live read intro. But since we don't, let me just skip right to the chase and say, hey, I'm Matt Wurst. How are you?
And I am Valerie Vespa. And we actually have product placement, unpaid product placement, organic product placement.
That is always a possibility. Let's strive for one today in this episode, and maybe go back to a partner once we've done it and be like, look how we really appreciate you. Send us some money. Is that how new business works in this industry? I don't really know.
Yeah.
You know who would know when it comes to spending media and investment dollars is today's guest. Liane Nadeau is the Chief Media and Investment Officer at Digitas North America within the Publicis Group. I believe she comes from your neck of the woods, Valerie.
Yeah, baby.
So I'm outnumbered, but Nixon 5. That's all I'm going to say.
Listen, Liane is a wonderful human. She's also a very busy human. So while she is here, we should probably get on and chat with her.
Just cut to the chase also? Like not mess around?
Yes.
Okay, but I really like to talk and stall for time. So that can't happen here?
No, please, Matt. No.
Okay, so then let's just cut right to it.
We're kicking off this episode of the Snarketing Podcast highly caffeinated and ready to go. This week, Matt and Valerie sit down with Liane Nadeau, Chief Media and Investment Officer at Digitas North America. Liane is one of the sharpest minds in the industry today. They get into her climb from programmatic buyer to leading a continent's worth of media, why context is having a moment, and what it means to advertise to humans and machines at the same time. Grab a seat. Let's get into it.
Hi, Liane. Welcome to the Snarketing Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So before we start, I just want to make an admission. I did not tell you this before we started recording, but you were in my dream last night. I don't often dream about podcasting, but for some reason, maybe I was excited. But we recorded an entire episode. I still remember some of the questions. It's too bad we didn't actually do it live. We did the whole thing in French. That is God's honest truth. And I know you work for a company that is owned by, the holding company is French, but how is your French? Can we do an entire episode in French or no? Is that not advised?
No, I don't know that I could get through the intros. It's something I've been meaning to work on, so I got to get Duolingo going or something, but no.
I think my French is only good enough for about a week each year when we're in the south of France. We were supposed to initially have this conversation either right before Cannes or after Cannes, so maybe that was why it was in my head, but we're grateful that we're talking to you now, so let's jump in. You ready?
Ready.
Okay. So it is now August, right? Which for anyone in our industry and media, it means back to school budgets are probably already spent. Halloween is basically here. And if you're not locked in for holidays at this point, you're probably in big trouble.
That's right.
Yet a lot of people are actually off taking vacation. So when this stretch of the year hits, what are the things that you and your teams are actually like sweating out that the rest of us may not see or think about yet?
Yeah, upfronts. We're in the throes of closing out upfronts. So as you and hopefully most of the listeners know, upfronts follow a broadcast calendar, meaning the media starts in Q4, what is traditional calendar Q4, and goes through next Q3. And so really Labor Day becomes that kind of marker of needing to close out all things upfront. Especially in the sports space where we're continuing to see, lower supply and ever increasing demand, both on the consumer side and on the brand side. So that's what we're focused on, I'd say right now the most. To your point, I think a lot of our global counterparts get a little bit quieter at this time of year, especially in the month of August. And if we were doing this fully in French, we might actually have to postpone it until September. So it's good.
I get an out of office message. That's true.
That's right. That's right. So definitely kind of preparing, to your point, for back to school, especially a lot of our retail brands have a lot of heavy sales in this window. So there's a lot of practical day to day in execution, and then from a planning perspective, really locking in dollars for the upfront.
I wanted to get into your background, but I feel like you've brought up a few things that just seem very interesting. So why not talk about it now? So what do you think are some of the main differences you're seeing in the upfronts today that are unique to this year? Because I just feel like in the news you hear so much about things changing and consolidations and acquisitions. So what do you think is one major epiphany you've had this year that just feels different from years past?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd call it an epiphany so much as kind of an eventuality we were expecting, but sports, I mentioned it before, it continues to just take the dominant share of budgets. It continues to be the first mover in upfronts. And now more than ever, I think the scarcity is really becoming a major driver in when we need to lock things in from a sports perspective, and frankly, the cost of those things. So I would say that's the biggest highlight that I can share of what we're seeing from this year. But it definitely is something that we were expecting, just maybe not to this extent.
Do you think that's because sports is really still the great unifier, right? There is seasonality to it. We can get data based on what the leagues and other teams make available in certain ways from an addressability perspective, but it's not really controversial either, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we're New Yorkers and Bostonians on the same call, maybe it gets a little controversial.
A little heated, but not controversial. Yeah.
But not controversial. Yeah. That's absolutely right. Yeah. I think that's absolutely why consumers are flocking there, and therefore brands need to be there. I think what's also really interesting, kind of separate from the upfronts, is how we're seeing sports evolve so much farther beyond just the linear coverage. And the brands that we're partnering with who are really winning in the sports space are thinking far beyond just what we need to secure in game. They are doing more custom in game and on the live stream, but they're also surrounding it in social. They're working with influencers. They're thinking about how they ensure that their coverage spans to YouTube, where we know so much of things are consumed, and clips and highlights. And so I think that's the other piece that, is really making sports a destination for marketers and for consumers, is the full 360. It doesn't stop at the TV screen.
And do you feel like the publishers are coming up with really creative ways to bring forth unique opportunities to your clients, or are you kind of working, with these publishers to kind of design for your clients, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both. I do. I think that the ones that, they're absolutely the streamers, the traditional broadcasters are evolving what these partnerships can look like and thinking about how we can bring it beyond just the four walls, or the box of four walls on your screen, on your TV. But it absolutely begets creativity from the brand and agency side. And I think that's why at Digitas, we've been so leaned in on sports. We talk about our value proposition as bringing networked experiences to life that are more than just channels, more than just spots and dots, more than just campaign ideas, but real true experiences that allow brands to be invited into consumers' lives, because that's the world we live in today. You can't just shout at, you have to be invited in. And so we believe networked experiences is the way to do that. So sports has given us such a great canvas to be creative in that way and to really surround consumers in a 360 fashion, and also to drive some brand relevance and resonance. I think we know that things are more likely to stick when they're related to something a consumer cares about. And so passion around sports and fandom around sports is so strong, probably stronger than any other medium. Unless you talk to Bravo folks, they share probably just as much as the NFL fans. But, it really is a place where you can go that is going to attract the right people and really lean into the resonance they're looking for from a brand.
Well, I think they're both also tackle sports, right? Bravo and football.
Bravo is also a sport. That's right. That's right.
So this idea of the networked experience, right? I know you've said the job is designing experiences for people, not just delivering ads to them. But
That's
for
right.
someone who may be outside or even adjacent to what that actually means, what's the difference between those two things?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that we like to say, especially within media here, is that channel planning is dead, right? You can no longer go and say, here is my strategy for TV, and here is my strategy for social, and here's my strategy for audio. As I think about a podcast like this one, and we even said in jest before we started, so much of podcasting, which we'd all classically call audio, is actually viewed in video in social environments. What do you call that? Is that social? Is that audio? Is that video? And so this bleeding together of channels, to what we've done is evolve our planning process. So it's no longer a pie chart where 30% goes to search and 20% goes to social, because that's not the way consumers experience brands and experience and engage with ads anymore. And so as we think about networked experiences, they're ideas that transcend just one single platform or one single campaign, if you will, and really become what a brand stands for, and an ethos that carries the way we show up across all channels.
So I want to talk a little bit about you, since that's what we kind of wanted to start with, but we pivoted to talking about sports and such. So I love seeing a woman in a C-level role. So congratulations to you for this big role. It's huge. But you didn't just parachute into this seat. You've had quite a few different roles within Digitas. You worked your way up through Hill Holliday. Can you just provide sort of a highlight reel of how you got to this place, and when there was this maybe intentional moment of you understanding, like, this is my trajectory, this is what I want for myself in the C-suite, and a little bit about how you got there?
Yeah. I'd say the theme you'll hear is curiosity. I think I definitely have a restless personality, in the sense of kind of always wanting to try something new, do something different. And so I actually started at Hill Holliday, as you mentioned, back in 2011, I believe it was, in a planning and buying role. So I was more of a traditional media planner. We planned across channels, and then we bought our own out of home and print. And this was 2011 certainly wasn't the advent of digital, but it was before digital and traditional were blended.
Yeah, video. You guys were running tapes to the different networks, right? And courier services.
Copies of insertion orders. And yes, I was a master at Xerox. And so I started getting curious about the people who sat on the other side of the floor, which was this kind of emerging, elusive digital team. And so I started, asking if I could just come to their meetings. And first it was a little like, ooh, you're not in the club, but slowly worked my way into what I thought was kind of where things were headed, which is, let's not look at digital separate from traditional. Let's start to bring those things together. So allowed my curiosity to lead me to a place where I could build a role there that was the first kind of blended or integrated role for one of our newer accounts. And so that curiosity led me to then step into a platform-based role, which was what we at the time called search, social, and programmatic, all platforms. And so in a role where I was overseeing a team trading in each of these different disciplines. And it was still pretty early days of programmatic. Again, not the advent of, but certainly, before it was fully in vogue.
Well, you invented the SSP acronym before it changed meanings, apparently, then, right? For search, social, and programmatic?
That's right. Exactly. It can mean so many different things. We needed more acronyms. That's what brought me over to Digitas, was to help build out the programmatic specific team here, and the self-service team here. And so that was now, like 10 and a half years ago, that I made that jump and came over. And to your point, I think my role has broadened with each step. And I think for me, that's because of the curiosity and the desire to learn something different and more. I think where there's been a couple of, you mentioned like an aha moment. I think there's been a couple of moments of, I wouldn't even say aha, but I would say I knew I was on the precipice of something exciting, because I was scared, and I was doing things that weren't my area of expertise. I, for a while went down this path of being incredibly well-versed and knowledgeable in the programmatic ecosystem. And then I saw the writing on the wall was like, okay, I want something broader. I want to start thinking about more channels. I want to start thinking about, strategy into investment and how those things kind of click together. But that's not the area of expertise I have. The area of expertise I had was lots of podcasts and meetings and partnerships around the cookieless world and where things were headed in that space. So in order to broaden, I kind of went through a little bit of an identity crisis or imposter syndrome, even if you will, of I want to broaden. I need to learn these other areas. I'm curious enough to want to learn these other areas, but I have to be okay not being the expert, even though I'm overseeing other experts. And so for me, that's what's kind of kept me charging on and broadening to full investment, then broadening, to now overseeing all of media.
And I think, well, I would say as someone who's worked both with and in some ways for and in that Publicis ecosystem over my time, and I have a lot of good friends who have been at Digitas and are still there. The staying power is incredible. A lot of long-term loyalty as this through line. And I think that may come from the DNA of the company. As someone who's been there as long as you have, when you look at the agency, not just you, but the agency that you walked into 10, 11 years ago versus the one that you're running now, what's changed? Is it clients? Is it the tech? Is it sort of expectations now because you guys have become this powerhouse?
Yeah, I think everything has changed as I think about, the agency, to your point, that we walked into. It was a different building here in Boston, but it's really transformed. So we were already, when I joined, a part of Publicis Group. That had happened a few years prior. But really what's changed about Digitas is size, scale, and frankly, keeping up with everything changing around us. I think what excited me and drew me in here and was the same at Hill Holliday is that it's not just a media agency, it's a full service agency. And so knowing that, eventually I want to be able to oversee marketing writ large and didn't know necessarily which area of that I wanted to go into, I knew that finding a destination that was not isolated to one specific thing allowed me the ability to grow up and broader. And so that's what Digitas offers, being full service. So I'm not in the creative department, but I sit right next to our chief creative officer. And I'm not in the department that's responsible for our organic social, but we work hand in hand with those teams. And so that kind of symbiosis and ability to broaden is what's stayed the same here. And then I think our ethos, we started as a digital only agency many, many years ago under a couple of different names. And we have kept true to the fact that digital truth is at the center of everything we do. And Digitas actually is a combination of the words digital and veritas, which means truth in Latin. See, so maybe we could do this in Latin. But we, blended those two things together because we saw a world ahead of others that said that you're going to find truth in behaviors, not in what people say. And digital was the place to go for that. So we've continued to evolve. We've continued to innovate. I think we, from a media perspective, have changed drastically from when I joined and we were digital only to then be a little more digital first to now being a truly fully scaled, integrated investment arm and now media arm. But it's something that, I think that the heart of Digitas has always stayed the same as that through line, even as we've continued to keep up and evolve with the marketplace.
There's been this narrative that agencies are getting disintermediated by platforms or in-housing. And so, I guess every client is nuanced, right? We were talking to someone last week who said that they're really only using their agency for vetting partners for AI and where there's complicated systems, right? So you're not buying that sort of idea there, I'm assuming. What's the case for the agency's value that holds up, especially as we think about planning for 2027? Just give me your perspective on all of that noise.
Yeah. I think it's funny you say it because I think some of the noise on in-housing specifically, I felt had quieted a bit over the years. I think what agencies bring from a value perspective is thinking that spans beyond the four walls of that single company. And I think that is never going to change. If you work for brand X, you know brand X better than anyone, better than any agency could. But what you miss is the larger ecosystem and marketplace in which it sits. And so I think, yes, agencies bring value via scale, especially as we talk about media and savings as a result of the scale that we bring. We bring unique ability to strike partnerships that no one single brand can build on their own, or co-develop with the platform partners. But what really sits underneath all of it is the ability to bring thinking to a brand that spans beyond what they know about themselves already. And so are there elements that brands can do themselves? Sure. Are there elements they should do themselves? Absolutely. Data ownership, that should be them. They should own their data and own kind of what they know about their consumers. Understanding their audiences, they're going to understand their audiences and what they're trying to accomplish and the insides of their four walls better than anyone because they work there. But I think the reality is that doesn't parlay into knowing the media ecosystem or knowing what happens with those consumers off their platforms. And so that's the value that an agency will always continue to bring. And why I think even as there's been kind of dalliances of bringing some things in-house or, we're going to move away from agencies, it seems to always return to true to form that when an agency is a true business partner, and that's where we aim to be is their most valuable partner, they bring so much more than you can ever in-house.
That's funny because I always used to wonder why brand side leads would spend so much time at conferences and going to events. And I thought that was the only way they could get visibility is by just like talking to people in the hallways.
Yeah.
I realized there's more to it than that, but I think that was the only way they could get that.
Right.
exposure.
Right. They had to.
Yeah. As you were talking about your career and your growth and the trajectory, starting from a digital perspective, at least in the programmatic space, I've heard you say that the old direct versus programmatic rivalry competition is basically over. And for many years, I certainly did. Like they were treated as opposites or two very different product offerings from a technology perspective. Even now, like for what I do, we've blended them together in ways where you're not always sure as the consumer what you're seeing, and it probably doesn't matter. But I'm curious from your perspective and your vantage point, what finally made them work together and what the industry maybe got wrong by treating them as either or, and what we're doing better now.
Yeah. And even when I oversaw the programmatic team, as it were, I felt very strongly that programmatic is not a channel. Programmatic is simply a way of transacting or a way of buying. And even, back then when I came over here to help build out the practice here in 2016, I used to love to say, when my husband goes to the store, I don't say, what did you buy? And he says, I bought with credit card. Like, no, what did you buy? Like, what is it that you're buying?
But at least that's addressable.
How you bought it. I'm looking for what you actually purchased. And I think that same thinking was something we kind of brought pretty early in, I'd say about 2018, we actually converged the direct digital and the programmatic teams here. Because the other thing that drove me bananas was this idea, to your point of them being opposites or in competition, is this idea that, okay, publisher X, you didn't make the direct plan. Now go talk to the programmatic team. It's like, one, we were duplicating work by having multiple conversations. And two, it felt like programmatic was like the dumping ground for the things that didn't make the direct plan. We are very, very focused on what are the audiences and inventory we need to secure, and what is the most clean, efficient, effective way to get that quality inventory and those quality audiences. And so it has to be audience inventory first, buying method second, not the other way around. And I think that's where the industry definitely got it wrong. And I like to think that we kind of accelerated some of the speed with which we changed that conversation here at Digitas. But what I think really changed it for the ecosystem was once you could buy your upfront inventory programmatically. I think that actually allowed people to say, okay, I'm not going to stop securing premium quality inventory in the upfront just because I'm going to access it through programmatic pipes. And so that to me was maybe a bit of a turning point for the industry, where we stopped seeing it as, kind of a catch-all for everything you didn't buy direct, and started seeing it more as just a buying method that does introduce value in some ways, and in some ways does not. And we're constantly talking to clients about kind of the pros and cons of accessing inventory pre-secured through your programmatic DSP, because sometimes it pays out, sometimes it doesn't. So things like frequency capping, things like management of audiences are still valuable reasons to buy through a DSP, but they're not, necessarily always worth the extra markup. And so that's a conversation we have quite a bit.
Interesting. So you've also made the point that like everyone chased audiences and biddable media, and we lost some of the content along the way, and now context is really the thing that matters the most. So is context is back a real strategic shift, or is the industry just like rediscovering something that should have never really dropped in the first place?
I think we're rediscovering something that probably never should have gone away. I think we used addressability as a conflated word with targeting for a while. Like when I started in this industry, the way we'd target, I worked on a hospitality brand who wanted to reach moms. The way we'd target was, okay, where do these moms spend time? Let's go buy those ecosystems and those publishers and be there in a way that will reach the people we're looking to reach. And that was targeting, right? We were targeting moms by buying Disney Family Fun magazine. What I think we lost along the way was the idea that in order to be targeted, you have to be one-to-one and addressable. And I think because of things like technology gaps, cookie deprecation, all of that, we actually started really optimizing ourselves out of growth. And I think that's something that we still see happen for some brands, especially that are only performance driven or only looking at still last touch attribution or just drive to immediate ROI benchmarks. But we started to optimize ourselves into a corner. And to go back to your earlier question, I think brands who are buying in-house do that, probably suffer from that the most, because they are used to just chasing that bottom line. And I think as we've started to reassess how we think about targeting and understand that it doesn't have to be one-to-one in order to be targeted, but also using the technology and the capabilities from an addressable perspective where they make sense, I think we're starting to strike that chord again. And I actually thought that Upfronts and New Fronts this year were a really good example of it was the first year I felt like it was all about the content again. And about the fandoms and about the things that people care about and get them excited, which was exciting for me. Not that I don't want to hear about your ad tech and the new targeting features and the new measurement something or other. The point was, where are the places and spaces your brands should show up based on where consumers are? And I felt like we were finally getting back to that.
Yeah, I used the term yesterday. We're in a post-targeting world, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
We're kind of past that. But it's interesting that you say that targeting and addressability have been conflated. Mm-hmm. I've thought, at least more recently, that measurability and addressability have been conflated in ways that I think we're also, at least hopefully, maybe starting to get past. I'm not sure. But yeah, it depends on the publishers, right? Like how they, like what they share. The walled gardens versus, open publishers have different approaches. Mm-hmm. I know you guys hold publisher partnerships just as accountable as social, programmatic, search. If a custom content campaign program, whatever, can't tie to a business outcome, it shouldn't make the next plan, right? So how do you connect that upper funnel thinking and work down to revenue without pretending that, I don't know, every impression is a sale or a conversion?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something I think to your point about kind of, conflating addressability with measurability. I think we've gotten to a place where just because we can measure it, we do. And I actually think that's just as dangerous as not holding media accountable. So there's almost two ends of the spectrum. There's, hey, it's TV, it's upper funnel, don't worry about how it's performing, all the way to, no, I need every single ad I run in prime time to drive low funnel outcomes immediately overnight. And I want to be able to measure that. And I think as the technology on this side of the spectrum has caught up and you're starting to be able to do that, think about like an Amazon, you can see, okay, we ran this in prime and then, we're able to see conversion here. We've gone too far, right? We, as an industry, we tend to do that. We chase something and we beat it to death. And I think that the answer for kind of that upper funnel is somewhere in the middle. We should be holding everything accountable to an outcome, but they don't always have to be immediate overnight outcomes to the business bottom line. And so how do we think about what's a proxy for, if I show you a Chevy ad tomorrow and you're not going to buy a Chevy truck the next day, how do I start to get to a metric that still allows me to optimize, still allows me to hold that media accountable, but not to an overnight sale? And I think we're kind of recalibrating in the middle, which is needed.
You're asking people to be patient. I don't know how
I would like to be a little
that's
more
going to be.
patient. Yeah, I know. Right. Trust me. I know.
And also, like, just to double tap on that, like how do those conversations happen, like with a brand, with the various teams that are responsible for budgets? Like where do you think that kind of starts? How does that typically go with brands and just sort of an aggregate level? Like, how do you feel like how does that resonate?
Yeah.
Is it in?
It's a great question. I think we've started to reposition the way we think about how consumers move through the journey to what we call the fluid funnel. Because I think it's become an easier way to talk about how activities need to perform and how we need to hold different media accountable in different ways. So as we talk about the fluid funnel, we're all familiar with the funnel that looks like this and goes from awareness to consideration and conversion. And for those listening, it's the upside down triangle. But what we have realized is, a lot of people say, oh, the funnel's dead. The funnel's gone. The funnel, is no longer relevant. What we believe is that people still do go through distinct phases of being aware of a brand and kind of living throughout their day, to becoming aware and considering that brand, to actually making a purchase and hopefully getting to the point of loyalty. We call it living, liking, loving, and loyal. But they do it in such a fluid manner. You can go from being completely unaware of a brand to actually making a purchase in one Instagram session. And you can also go from being loyal to a brand all the way back up to not considering them in an instant with, a faux pas on social media. And so the phases people go through are not dead, but what we've been able to do is use that kind of those 4 phases as a diagnostic, what we call the NX score, the networked experience score, to understand how are brands ranking in these areas, and therefore where do we need to spend to help them catch up in certain areas. So you might be someone everyone's aware of and knows the name, but not considering because there's no resonance or meaning behind your brand. So that's where we need to spend. And therefore we need to be measuring that on brand resonance and meaning and not on low funnel sales. So I think that's been a helpful framing for our clients.
Nice.
But every client is different. And I think the pressure that brands are under is real. And so, yes, while I think in theory, we get a lot more buy-in with this kind of framework, everyone else also needs to know how much we're driving in sales.
That's a lot smarter of an answer than I would have thought, which is just don't schedule reporting meetings with your client every week. Make them once a year. Then you've bought some time, right? Just patience, right?
It's just you're not in client service, Matt. I didn't know.
I have been, and now you know why I am no longer. That doesn't fly. But it is that non-linear, like, it's like, zigzag, and retention is loyalty is actually awareness at the same time. You're teaching someone about something new in your post-checkout page, and you're like, that's not a funnel, it's just fun. And that's, I think, the real difference. The model where I think that becomes really most evident, at least the way I've seen it in the last few years, is the retail media, commerce media, whatever term we want to call it,
Sure.
because there is so much direct in your face awareness and like buy now at the same time. Amazon's doing it. I mean, we're doing it. Everyone's doing it. But you're working with clients where shopper behavior is the whole game, and you have access to insights and data and analytics and behavioral metrics that I probably can't even understand, let alone actually put into practice. So as we're heading into probably the peak shopping season, the peak media season, Q3, Q4, are we, in whether it's in retail media, commerce media, or in something new where you're focusing, are we living up to the actual performance of that in a way that the investment is being proven out? Like, is it worth it?
Yeah, I would say in pockets. It like anything, I think it really depends, frankly, category to category, brand to brand. The purchase of, as I'm, gave an example before of auto is going to be very different than a lip gloss. And so I think that the way in which you need to act and behave in front of consumers in each of those phases is different based on the category, based on the brand's health and where they're performing. What I'd say is, you described kind of putting that shop now button everywhere. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right approach, is just to blanket, everyone with a buy now and then hold them all accountable, every ad accountable. But what I think we've done a really good job of is starting to remove the friction. Because if people are going to go from, I wasn't aware about this lip gloss brand, to I want to buy it this second, we need to give them that option and eliminate the friction. And so some of what we've been able to do through, social shopping and things like that has eliminated that. And I think that in a fluid funnel world is critical. I think there's a difference between removing the friction to get to a purchase and actually holding every single ad accountable to a purchase. And that's where I think the lines blur, because we can all hold hands and agree at the outset that something's not accountable to buys or to overnight transactions. But when that option's there, and to my point before, where we can measure it, oh well, let's just take a look. So I think that's, it's something that will always constantly be balancing. I think is, what are we holding media accountable to, and how do we actually measure against that outcome that we're looking for, and how do we continue to make buyability, engagement with a brand really frictionless.
Yeah, I mean, I think about brands that follow me around all the time and like annoying to the point that either I purchase it or I'm completely muting them for so there's a balance there for sure.
Just send them to your AI, your AI evaluator, whether you should buy it or not.
Yeah.
So one of your speaking of AI, one of your observations is that we're not just advertising to people anymore, we're actually advertising to LLMs. So publisher partnerships can shape how a brand shows up in an AI driven discovery. So what does it mean to build for an audience of machines, and how is it already changing how and what you buy?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it's changing every minute, which is exciting and not something we're unfamiliar with in this industry. But I think the speed at which it's changing is more rapid than anything we've seen before. What I would say is, we've long done SEO. SEO sits within our media team here under our head of search, because we've always thought about it as kind of paid organic total search together, and those two things complementing each other. And it's allowed us to, I'd say, accelerate in the buzzword like AEO, GEO space faster than a lot of folks have. What I think is, there's a lot of people focused. There's so many elements of the LLMs and AEO, GEO. There's how do we show up with ads there, right? There's a couple opportunities for ads. Google's obviously got their AI Plus, and we're able to show up in environments there. We also know, OpenAI is testing into ads. And so there's that piece of it, which is a pretty easy checkbox. There's the element of it where we need to evolve our SEO approach to ensure our rankings are higher. And that's more traditional kind of nuts and bolts SEO, but done in a very different way to be able to feed the LLMs. And then there's how do you make your media speak to both? And I think that's the part that the industry hasn't cracked yet, and where we're focused really, really hard here is how do we make sure that when we're, doing a buy on Reddit and we're setting up an Ask Me Anything, and that we're creating it not only for humans to engage with, but for it to be the right content to fuel the LLMs. And I think
the discoverability later. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's an art that has to live within your entire media team. It can't just live with the search team. And so, the search team can kind of cover buckets 1 and 2, but we need to create a fluency among everyone that you've got a new audience now. And how do you design for that audience in a way that allows all of that media to work harder and to be more surfaceable and to really increase rank? So we've been doing a ton of training from, our teams on, and this is kind of keeping AI for the work we do separate. There's lots of training going on there too, but how do we bring that kind of AEO, GEO mindset to all of our media planning and buyers? Because it can't live in a silo anymore.
Right.
I think that's probably a good segue to what could be a good last or forward-thinking question, because AEO, GEO in the next year will probably dominate the we need to get this right story. You've been in the driver's seat or had a front row seat for every media shift of the last 10, 15 years, from TV to CTV to now leading investment across a continent. So when you look at these next, let's say 3 to 5 years, what's the change that you think most people in this business are either not thinking about or maybe underestimating?
That's a really good question. I want it to be AEO GEO because you made it a segue, but I'm going to pivot in another direction. I think the biggest thing that is being ignored and needs to be paid more attention to is this idea of channels converging. And so I think there's so many examples. You go to Pinterest, which is managed by our social team. I've never spoken to anyone on Pinterest. There's nothing social about that. You go to a gas station and you've got out of home ads that are TikTok ads on your screen. Is that video? Is that, out of home? Is that social? And so I think the brands that are being held back from building true networked experiences are those who are, being guided to focus on channel allocation. And so I do fear that if we go too far down an AI optimization path, we're going to continue to, again, optimize ourselves out of growth, but also not embracing this whole ecosystem or networked experience approach is a big risk, because brands are going to continue to lose resonance even if they get that overnight sale right away. So that's where I'd say isn't being paid enough attention to.
Well, I appreciate you shining some light, because I think that's probably my personally biggest challenge at the moment, is that differentiated who owns what when everything is converging. And why I have to have 5 meetings sometimes to get to the right person. I'm sure you're experiencing that too. All of us are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Let's accelerate that. Let's make that our homework. Just kind of force people together in one room. And then we'll see if we can shrink that timeline.
In the blur between channel, segments of that pie graph I mentioned. And unfortunately, it's the thing that often gets ignored, because it doesn't belong to social, but it doesn't belong to search, but it doesn't belong to video. And I think that's where, the opportunity lies.
Going full circle to your initial statement about curiosity fueling your growth, it's like all of our growth will be fueled with a bit more curiosity about how everything can be interconnected. So I never do a segue quite like Matt does. So I feel like
that was great. It was non-linear and it was not in a funnel in any way. It was perfect. So
love it.
So Liane, we're going to do a couple of quick lightning round questions, because I love the unprepared nature that sometimes throws people into honesty. Not that you haven't been honest, but I think it's just kind of a more unfiltered approach. So
Matt, before you start with your question, can I just ask my first one of the lightning round? Which is,
please. Bring the thunder and the lightning.
How did you ever have a Boston accent? Is it hidden in there? Me too.
It's not in there. No, you have to live really close to the city or in the city to really have it. Like Quincy's got their own little thing, Boston proper, but no, not out the suburbs.
Okay, same. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask you to say Dunkin' Donuts for the first lightning round question, but you kind of stole my thunder there. So.
I don't say it any special way.
What is your Dunkin' order?
Oh, I actually just like a
product placement alert.
Oh, I know. Hot black, like traditional, straight caffeine to bloodstream.
So this is a fun one that I don't know what the right answer is to, so I'm curious to hear yours. If you had the last dollar to spend for a client, CTV, paid social, or search, and I know it probably depends on the product category and a million factors. So let's just say we're doing that for, you mentioned lip gloss and auto as your 2 categories earlier. Where would $1 go for each of those?
I would say lip gloss, social, auto, CTV.
Okay. All right. I'm going to stay tuned and follow both channels just to see where and how that shows up. What do you think is the most important metric right now in media? Like when you're looking at a dashboard or a spreadsheet, what's the first place your eyes go to?
Incremental anything. when I see that I in front of it, I pay extra special attention, because I think without it, we're just tracking what was already going to happen. So
Right.
that can be
It's
incremental ROI, incremental sales, incremental reach. Because to the point we made before of optimizing yourself out of growth, if you just chase that last click, you're not getting anything incremental out of it.
Is there a brand that you're not working with, let's just say that, whose strategy or activations, just from afar, you may not be in the room or know what they're doing exactly, but something that you either secretly or openly admire and have some like FOMO or professional jealousy of?
That's a good one. I would say Nike. I think that the way they've stayed true on the way they approach sports, especially, given how big of a focus that is, and the way they've shown up, that really drives resonance and relevance for their brand, is something I think I'll always be envious of.
And last one, finish this sentence as someone who's been agency, new business, etc. The agency that wins the next pitch is the one that
brings a networked experience to a brand, across not only media, but also their entire marketing ecosystem, creative, CRM, etc.
Well, since you've built networked experiences, you're the only ones who can deliver that. So that means you should win.
It was strategic. Yes.
Yes.
Fingers
Liane,
crossed.
Drink your own Kool-Aid.
This is, I was going to say thank you for sharing that, but also for making us part of your networking experience. That's what we've done
That
here.
was good. That was good.
I
He
tried. It was a
He's had better
stretch,
ones.
but yeah, we'll have to edit that later. Or you know what? We'll just have you back to gut check everything that we said and predicted in 5 years or 3 years, and we'll see how we did.
That sounds great. I look forward to it. We'll do it in French.
Oh, oui.
Oui.
Oh, gosh.
That's it for this episode of the Snarketing Podcast. Thanks to Liane Nadeau for joining us. If you liked this one, share it with a fellow marketer. You can also follow us on the socials, and we'll see you next time.